Buenas tardes. Please allow me to convey my director's apologies for not being able to attend today. She has had some urgent issues to resolve, and I'll be speaking on her behalf. It's a pleasure for us at Fundación Bertelsmann to welcome you all here to the presentation of the Bertelsmann Transformation Index 2026. We are thrilled to see the remarkable number of people interested in the BTI results from international institutions, government, Spanish government officials, regional and also local government representatives, universities, think tanks, foundations, universities, students. What a wonderful mix. Thank you all for being here. I'm not going to go into the details, but I want to highlight the value and the huge amount of work being behind a project of this sort. For 20 years now, the BTI has been collecting valuable information on the health of democracy in 137 countries. Thanks to this, we have highly valuable information about what's going on around the world in political, economic, and social terms. More than 300 experts and regional coordinators around the world collect on a permanent basis the information that will be presented here today. This amount of information is gathered, analyzed, systematized, and presented every 2 years by a small but a very efficient team. My colleagues from the Bertelsmann Stiftung, Hauke Hartmann, Sabine Donner, and Sebastian, they're here, and Sebastian Platte, who's not here, but who is in Germany. Pleasure to have you two here. Data gives us the ability to understand reality more clearly, identify patterns, measure progress, and anticipate challenges before they become problems. And this is what the BTI is all about, reliable data. On behalf of Carmen Sebrango, my director, we would like also to thank Fundación Carolina and its director, Erika Rodriguez, for the support that you have given us. It has been a pleasure to work with you and the team. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to take part in this event presenting the Bertelsmann Transformation Index organized together with the Fundación Carolina, a particularly valuable opportunity to reflect on the political, social, and institutional challenges that we are currently facing. The Transformation Index is a key reference tool for analyzing the quality of democracy, the rule of law, governance, and processes of political and economic transformation across different countries. Its value lies not only in enabling international cooperation, but also helping us understand broader trends, identify risks, and think about responses from a democratic perspective. The collaboration with Fundación Carolina also brings a particularly valuable Ibero-American perspective, fostering informed dialogue between academic analysis, public policy, and international cooperation. I'm sure this meeting will provide an excellent opportunity to exchange ideas, enrich the debate, and move towards a deeper understanding of the challenge that the world is facing. Thank you.
I'm going to be doing all the job today, so bear with me. Now we have the pleasure of having the keynote speaker, Ángel Alonso Aroba, the Deputy Chief of the Office of the Spanish Prime Minister. Ángel, you have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the Fundación Bertelsmann for hosting us in this wonderful space. Thank you also, Erika and Fundación Carolina, the excellent work that you're doing there from the foundation. And let me tell you something, no? When my good friends Hauke and Sabine asked me to join here today to intervene, I could think of two very good reasons not to be here today. The first one is that I'm surrounded by people like you who know probably much more than I do about the issues at stake, and hopefully we will be hearing from you more. So, you know, experts, Fernando, someone that we all admire, Erika, and you guys who are among my heroes in terms of social research for many years. So, first of all, I thought there's very little that I can add to this wonderful conversation that we're going to have. But most important, the main reason why I thought I shouldn't be here is that normally we people who work in the cabinets, and especially when you work in Moncloa, our number one rule is that we shouldn't be in public, we shouldn't say much, because every time we open our mouth, we run a risk of saying anything that we shouldn't say, and then someone there, you see Moncloa says or anything like that. So we tend to minimize that risk. Now, that said, I could think of three very good reasons to be here. The first one is that this was a call by two very good old friends. So when friends call, you say yes. And I wanted to be here with you and for you. The second is that I'm a very true admirer of the BTI for many years. And I've been working with Hauke and Sabine. We were back 20 years ago. And since then, I got to know the BTI, the work that you do. So, I think, I'm not only here in my capacity, I'm also here of someone who admires the work that you do. And the third reason is that I think in this current moment, we should all have a sense of responsibility. It is a moment in which we need to stand for democracy, for positive political and economic change, transformation, like the one that you guys document in your report, and for good governance. So anytime you have the chance to be here and raise your voice, I think we have a duty as well to do it, even if normally we are the ones who are in the background, and we were there for our boss to say those words. So this is the reason I'm here, sharing some humble thoughts, because democracy and progress are not self-sustaining, and this is something that we should know by now. Democracy, progress, they demand constant renewal. And if we don't take care of them, if we don't nurture them day to day, countries recede, societies go back, and we go backwards as humanity. And that is a reality right now, I'm afraid. Let me start by highlighting some of striking figures. Almost 6 billion people in the world, as you guys have documented, now live under an authoritarian regime or system. That is roughly 75% of the world population, so 3 out of 4 human beings. In 2005, when I had the opportunity to collaborate with you guys, when I was a young researcher in Washington, D.C., that percentage stood at 50%. So 1 out of 2 individuals were living. And at that time, we were considering that we were at the crest of the third wave of democratization, as Huntington would say. There was a genuinely belief that we could engineer a fourth wave of democratization. My collaboration at the time with you guys in Bertelsmann, working at the time at the Democracy Coalition Project, was a project to analyze the invitations, if you guys remember, to the Community of Democracies, the fourth meeting of the Communities of Democracies. So remember that time, We're talking about the early 2000s, that project that was launched at the time by Madeleine Albright and all that. Here in Madrid, the Club of Madrid, and we have here Ruben with us as well, was being funded. And, we had this positive vibe, that we were going to be fostering democracy, we were going to be promoting democratic transition, consolidation in many places, And even here, we had still our recent transition, recent at the time in Spain, and that was a leitmotif for us at the time. The dominant debate at the time in foreign policy was whether we could promote democracy abroad. And of course, I don't want to sound nostalgic about that time. We shouldn't. To some extent, many of the things that we are witnessing now are things that we are inheriting from that time when we, and I say we generally, but some countries understood democracy promotion, maybe not in the way that they should. Remember, this is a time of the neocons, nation building in places like Iraq, Afghanistan. So as we say in Spanish, de aquellos polvos estos lodos, to some extent. So some of the seeds were planted at the time. But let me stress that it was a very different vibe at the time. The overall momentum was there, More democracies, broader engagement with the multilateral system, a general sense of optimism, and the results were there to see, With its lights and its shadows, there was a positive trend in terms of democratic advancement. A few years later even, remember the early beginning of the last decade, we witnessed the Arab Spring, and that some that to some extent, no, there was perceived that that could be that fourth wave of democratic transition, no? And of course, those expectations, those hopes at the times, they were not fulfilled. And in some cases, what we saw was a backlash, a restoration of autocracies in many countries. And here we are now, 15 years later from that time. More than 15 years later, since then, we see that that wave of democratization did not materialize. And we are presenting a report that continues to offer a thermometer of where our societies are heading. And it sends a very clear message about the direction in which we are heading, and that's not necessarily a positive direction. The thermometer that, to some extent, you guys give us in the report tells us that we have a bit of a fever, as humankind. The BTI certifies this. Let me just stress, because Hauke is going to do the proper presentation of the report with all the data. 56% of the 137 countries that you assess are now governed fully autocratically, more than half. This is not to say that the rest are necessarily full democracies, or, we're talking about proper autocracies. And 2/3 of the countries assessed since 2006, the score has gotten worse in terms of the political transformation. And, the diagnosis is out there. Elections failed to meet the minimum democratic standards in over half of all the cases analyzed. Freedom of expression, a critical element, a barometer of any democracy, stands at its lowest level in the history of the BTI index. And the share of countries where that freedom has effectively vanished has nearly doubled just in the last 10 years. And let me tell you, the BTI is not alone in this diagnosis. We have many other indicators and institutions that study this. The Evident Democracy Report, which was just published a few weeks ago, places democracy globally at the same level as it was in 1978. So I'm from 1977, so 50 years after that, we're back to where we were. So not necessarily a very positive trend. International IDEA, which is another source of reference in this topic, in its Global of State of Democracy report, complements this picture by noting that 54% of the countries assessed have experienced a decline in at least one of the factors in terms of the democratic performance that they assessed, just in the last 5 years. So there you are, 3 different sources, 3 different fantastic reports, one diagnosis. That we are heading in a very bad direction. Now, let me stress, it was done at the very beginning, the value of the BTI, because I'm here, to give you some flowers, not only as a friend, but also, as I said, as someone who admires the work that you guys have been doing for many years. It is a great index that not only assesses this state of democracy, it gives you a very dynamic sense of where societies are going, both in terms of the political transformation, both in terms of the economic transformation, but maybe more important for me in the sense of the governance, because at the end of the day, I'm a true believer that it's all about the governance, the adequate governance. And your 17 indicators that you have under these 3 baskets tell us how countries evolve, in which direction they are moving. And as I was saying, that direction is a negative one. Now, let me also sound a little bit positive. There's a bit of a silver lining in the report. One that, by the way, I was here 2 years ago as audience, as a supporter. And this is something that you guys have also been documented over the past few years, that your data keeps disarming this argument about the so-called authoritarian argument, this idea that autocracies perform better than democracies, that has taken root in some countries for many years. And we know that this is totally false, and you guys prove it, democracies remain the only system that guarantees sound governance and effective states. And you guys do this empirically, which is the value of the work that you do. Out of 35 states with good or very good governance in your report, 31 are democracies. And now let me open a little parenthesis there. This should not be a surprise to anyone. We know that this autocratic, and especially over the past 20 years, has taken a bit of a hold in terms of sometimes economic performance. But, there's no reason, behind that argument, because it cannot be other way. No matter how many challenges or shortcomings our democracies and our democratic systems may have, we know this is the most effective government system because it holds power accountable. It holds power accountable. It implies scrutiny. It allows you to change what doesn't work when it doesn't work. And now let me put my progressive hat. This also applies, in my view, not only to the democratic system itself. Now that there is a lot of criticism sometimes about the public sector, this also applies to the public sector. Every time I hear or someone tells me that the public sector is more inefficient, more ineffective, that is more prone to malfunctioning, even to corruption, I say that's false. I wish very often the private sector had the same level of scrutiny that the public sector has in our system. So the same applies to democracy. And why? Because the systems of accountability are there, and they're in place, and they tend to work. But going back to the report, let me also stress a few good things, news that it brings, figures that also reveal a little bit of a map of resilience. The BTI highlights that 27 countries have strengthened or preserved their democratic quality over the past decade, And there's the good cases, that we should always look at. That's the case of Brazil, of Poland, Senegal, South Korea, Bangladesh. These cases remind us of something very essential. Autocratization is not an irreversible path, even if it must seem to be the dominant trend nowadays. Where institutions hold firm, where civil society holds firms, when there is political will to reform and do things better, that decline can be reversed. And that is the moment when hope springs. Now, I don't want to stand too much, but let me also highlight another important aspect that I think it is there because it's very critical to the discussion that we also have. We also need to be vigilant to many new challenges that have emerged. And again, when I go back to my experience 20 years ago, they were not there, or they were not there with the same intensity that they are right now. Here I'm talking about digitalization, Of course, digitalization was there, but it was not developed to the extent that we have seen, in which, digital repression is used by many authoritarian regimes. And this is something that, for instance, the VDEM reports pinpoints, showing that freedom of expression is the dimension that has eroded the most in terms of the indicators that they use globally. Of course, new technology, and we are seeing those risks, generative artificial intelligence, deepfakes, algorithm manipulation, they are transforming the ecosystem in which we live. And as we know, our regulatory frameworks cannot keep pace with the degree of that transformation. And of course, misinformation, disinformation, we have seen it in recent cases and how that affects democracy and even, election cycles. We saw it in Romania, we saw it in Moldova, in many other cases. But let me also tell you that these new challenges not only emerge from technology itself. The deterioration of public services has also become both a cause and a consequence of that democratic erosion. In 50 countries, as you guys document, reliable access to essential infrastructure, water, sanitation, electricity, remains unsecure. And when the state fails to deliver on those basic services, citizens, as we know, lose trust. But that erosion runs deeper, and we also feel it in our well-established or well-developed democracies, When citizens see that their governments cannot deliver on the issues that shape people's daily life, and here I'm talking about the cost of living, affordable housing, the quality of the education, the healthcare system, its privatization as well, the distance between the democratic promise and the democratic performance becomes a political reality, and once again, democracy and the belief in the system and that social contract suffers. And the BTA highlights this very clearly, In stable democracies, public support has fallen steadily over the past decade. And this is not because necessarily the people or the citizens are rejecting the principles. It's because they feel and they experience that the system is not delivering for them, it's not working for them. And it is precisely because of that gap that authoritarian narratives take hold. And narratives that are taking a toll on our democracies on an increasingly dangerous way. And we are seeing how principles that until not that recently were not questioned at all, we had elections, you could be happier or sadder about the result, but there was an overall acceptance of the results of those elections. Now we have that feeling that they are being systematically questioned, that there's not an acceptance of that just because we are not happy with that result. Or even the peaceful transition of power. Think about all the many cases, I won't mention them, that we have seen in which what used to be that ritual of the transition of power, now more and more it becomes a more painful habit and something that we should not take for granted. And it is precisely because of this fear that we, and when I say we, I mean Spain, we have a very clear commitment to help rebuild that narrative, and that is compelling the Spanish government to act. As you guys know, the Spanish government leads the In Defense of Democracy initiative, and we just held a very important meeting of leaders in Barcelona over a month ago. And we did that because we understand that defending democracy is a collective endeavor that requires allies, instruments, but above all, it requires political will and political muscles from governments who are committed to stand for democracy when it is more needed. And that is because strengthening democracy does not stop at our national borders. Democratic values are an essential component of global governance and of reinforcing that very same multilateralism that it is increasingly questioned. At a time when some people perceive that multilateralism is in retreat, reinforcing those democratic values and bringing them to the core of the multilateral system itself is an indispensable condition for rebuilding that trust in the international architecture. And we should hold those same values that we apply to our local governments, to our autonomical regional governments, to our national governments. We should bring those same values of participation, of ownership, of accountability to the core of the international system. Because the dangers and the risks, if we do not do that, are obvious. A backlash, a retreat, nationalism, and at the end of the day, a much poorer world. So let me stop there, because probably I spoke for too long or longer than I should, and leave you with one final thought, especially since Hoke and Sabine, they told me that the value of this should be to take a little bit of stock of our 20 years of friendship and collaboration. Let me tell you that for that very young graduate, still in his 20s, that worked with you guys a few years ago, it would have been very hard to imagine that today, in 2026, we would be in a world like the one in which we are living, And as I said, you don't have to agree with that situation, that vibe of 20 years ago, and many of the things that we are enduring today, they are a result from them. But again, this sense of reversal, of backlash, of backtracking, of pessimism, it would have been very hard to imagine at the time. And yet, as I was thinking a little bit about what I was going to say, I was also thinking about, in this period of time, in these 20 years that we have known each other, so many great things happen as well. Think about it, no? Maybe that democratic wave, in the Middle East, it didn't fulfill itself, but there was a moment in which we had that glimpse of hope. There's so many things that have happened, just only 10 years ago, in terms of an international community, we agreed on the SDGs and the 2030 agenda. We agreed on the Paris Climate Agreement. I worked many years at the OECD. We did a fantastic job at the time in terms of advancing, the fighting against tax evasion and tax erosion at the global level. So, this also shows that, good things can happen. And even just only 1 year ago, in this moment in which we perceive that international collaboration is going through a more difficult moment, even Spain, holding the Finance for Development Conference in Sevilla, we send a positive message to the world, showing that, when we come together, we can make things happen. So let me leave you with this final message of hope, no? The next 20 years, maybe when we meet here 20 years from now, who knows in which capacity, will be what we make out of them, you know? Maybe it seems that we are going through a moment of reversal, but the task ahead for all of us is very clear, no? We cannot take democracy, progress for granted, and more, I have to say, we cannot even take this wall of peace that we have known for the past 80 years for granted. But we must never give up that hope, and especially we must never give up the energy to make it happen, to work for that. And in your report, 27 countries have shown that decline can be reversed. And that is not a footnote, that is a roadmap, that is a lesson on how to do things. And let me tell you also, and I will finalize with this, that the BTI and the work that you guys do is a compass for all of us. So let's grab that compass together with our coherence, with our values, and try to move in that positive direction. I'm sure we will be able to do it. So thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation.
Many thanks, Mr. Alonso, for your thought-provoking speech. You've talked about a metaphor, a thermometer. You've talked about how high it is in some countries, but also how low. These are 27 countries that perform not so bad. So where do we stand here? This is precisely what Mr. Hauke Hartmann, the director of the BTI, will explain to all of you now. Hauke, you have the floor. Thank you.
Hello and good evening. And first of all, a very big thank you for all of you showing up here tonight, showing your interest, giving me your attention. The memory is a really funny thing because when you're remembering not logically, but you're remembering emotionally most of the time. And what happened in the past, you're sorting it in a way emotionally. And Angel, I cannot thank you enough for your kind speech that you were giving. And when I'm thinking back of the time when we worked together, it was a sense of optimism that was carrying us. There was always the belief that the world will be more democratic, people will be more empowered, and countries will be cooperating better in the future. And that is something that is not forgotten. That is something that I think when you're looking back at the time when we started our work more than 20 years ago, when we worked together, when a lot of people, some of them in this room, started thinking about how a better world could look like. This is something that lasts on, and it does not lose you. You're still thinking yes, but you do have that in you. You do have that in you to make that better, and that is something very, very rewarding. It warms my heart when I hear you speak, and it warms my heart when I speak to people that believed 20 years ago, yes, we can do that better, and I still believe we can do that better. And so for tonight, I'm going to present you the worst results that the BTI ever had. But I'm going to end on a positive note, because it is so important, I think, to send a positive note and a positive message. It's not like whistling in the dark. It's more like looking at the positive messages, because there's a younger generation here, and this younger generation needs to have the same kind of optimism that we used to have 20 years ago. With that, Angel, I do thank you very much. I also do thank the very people that help us to make Madrid feel like home away from home. And that is Vicent Clement, and that is Elisabeth Gil from Fundación Bertelsmann. And you provide us with so much support and with so much dedicated enthusiasm. Thank you for doing that. And co-hosting the conference was Erika Rodriguez, is the Fundación Carolina. We were honored, we were proud when we heard that even the chance existed that you would do that together with us. And I cannot thank you enough for that. And I'm very, very curious to hear you at the round table later on, at the round table where also, Fernando, you will be contributing. Your book list is longer than my introductory speech, so you have such a vastness of profound knowledge on democracy, on the challenges that democracy is facing, and we're very honored to have you with us. Thank you so much. A good thing about Angel's speech, in addition to being really very, very and perhaps overly nice to us, is also that it already mentioned a couple of things, and you also, Vicent, in your introduction did. So I'm going to be really very, very brief about that, about who is talking to you. What is it when Sabine and I are directing the BTI? What do we actually do? Angel, no, Vicent, you already mentioned that it is an expert-based survey. We have more than 300 country and regional experts from more than 120 countries. We might be presenting the results, but the true work is really done by the people who are writing the country reports. That are writing the country reports is the second thing. We have textual evidence for you. We do not simply hand you over some numbers that you can either believe or not believe. But we hand over to you information that you can verify or falsify, or you can simply pick up the phone and call us up and say, what do you write in your Ecuador report? I don't agree at all. That's the possibility of a discussion. A discussion is not when you are presented with a data that you either have to believe or not. So this is what I really very much like to do, what we like to do, and that is open a debate with the analysis that we are presenting every second year. And I leave it at that. It was already mentioned that we are the different politics and economics and governance that we are looking at. One thing I need to mention, when we started out, and when we started out, I mean not in the early 2000s, but when we started out, not we, but the ones that prepared the BTI in the mid-90s, or started to prepare the BTI in the mid-90s, we were looking at change processes. We were curious to learn how do governments steer through the very complex process of shifting towards a more democratic, more market-based, more socially inclusive order. How do you do that? And what can governments learn from each other? That was the guiding question, really, what we wanted to do. So by the mid-90s, and then also when Sabine and I published the first BTI then in 2006, at that time, we distinguished, and that was a mistake, I have to be frank about that, it was a mistake, we distinguished between already firmly established democracies like Spain or Germany or the US or Japan, and between countries that are still in the process either of change or of consolidation. Many of the EU member states were not even members at that time. And that assumption that there would be democracies that were so firmly established in their democratic institutional order that that could not be reversed. In retrospect, I would say that was a mistake. I mean, we were not alone in making that mistake, but nonetheless, we are looking to revise that, and we are looking to include also the 23 OECD member countries that are still missing in our analysis. Those are the three columns that we are looking at: political transformation, economic transformation, and transformation management or good governance. Let me just say we try to do it as comprehensive as possible, meaning just holding elections and guaranteeing some basic rights does not constitute a democracy, but it has to be a firm anchoring in the rule of law, and we are measuring also the democratic consolidation process. How firmly anchored is a democracy in a society? And with economics, it's again a comprehensive approach, meaning that we are not looking at your standard macroeconomic indicators, but we are also looking at the social and at the sustainable side of economic development. And then with good governance, We differentiate between authority of a government, steering capability and resource efficiency. Can a government prioritize? Can it implement? Can it learn? Is it able to coordinate? Does it have an anti-corruption policy? And then inclusion on the other hand. How is conflict management? How firmly is civil society integrated into the political decision-making process? Is there even a consensus among the elites where the country should be headed to? What about anti-democratic veto actors? And internationally, how credible is a government? How does it act? How reliably does it act? How does it act on a regional level, cooperative or confrontational? So this in a nutshell, just to say this is where we come from. Now, the very worst results we ever had, at least in terms of democracy and governance, there was a little bit of an uptick in economic transformation because this is post-COVID-19, inflation, so there was a little bit, but really a meager uptick. The worst results ever, and that is for three reasons, really. The first one is on the level of autocratic regime change. The second one is on autocratic hardening, and the third one is on democratic backsliding. And so I'm going to briefly run you through all of these three aspects. The one, autocratic regime change, and Angel already mentioned that the ratio has reversed. 10 years ago, we had 56% democracies. Today, it's 56% autocracies. How does it come about? What changed in the meantime? I differentiated here a little bit between the pre-2020 autocratizations and the post-2020, because it's interesting to see what happened just the last couple of years. Many of the autocratizations that we saw of the 27 autocratization, meaning in full 15, happened after 2020. And as you can see by the coloration of the map, much of these autocratizations happened in Africa. That does not make autocratizations any less harmful. It is just this map, as it is, does not really call for global doomsday of democracy. It looks at very specific regional phenomena which are located in West Africa, in Central America, and in Southeastern Africa, and then, of course, very much so in the post-Soviet influence sphere. And it sometimes has really very country-specific reasons. This has not something to do with a global disenchantment of democracy. This is something to do with very poor states having a really rough time in upholding democratic institutions, especially if there is a geostrategic player like Russia heavily intervening in West Africa. Just to contextualize it a little bit and go beyond the numbers that we are seeing. The second one, the second effect is autocratic hardening and the further shrinking of civic space. What we are seeing here is, first of all the autocracies that we are having in the BTI, and what we are observing is there is an autocratic hardening in more than half of the countries, autocratic countries that we are looking at. The worst level of political participation rights ever, meaning what used to be elections with only limited influence are now sham elections, facade elections, like in Azerbaijan or in Belarus or in Russia or in Rwanda. We see a couple of coups like in Gabon or Niger, and we see election manipulations like in Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, Venezuela, where there were strong, massive, forcefully repressed street protests against that. But it means that these demonstrations that are happening against manipulation, against mismanagement, against misrepresentation, that they are facing pressure from the street, that people are no longer willing to bear the consequences of an autocratic regime. In a nutshell, I would hold that autocracies maybe are even under more pressure today, autocratic governments, than democratic governments are. At least the record level of political repression would speak for that. 2/3 of the autocracies that we are looking at today are hardline autocracies. We differentiate between hardline and moderate autocracies. One of the reasons is that autocracies are simply, as you said, Angel, not delivering. The third factor is democratic backsliders. This, again, is quite an impressive number of formerly pretty advanced democracies that slid back during the last 20 years. Well, I mean, Costa Rica barely made it on the list, but if the threshold point is a half a point on a 10-point scale, it might not sound so dramatic. Still, I think Costa Rica, but Erika will perhaps say more about that later on, is a country to watch, I think, because there's something in a sliding process. Nonetheless, 1 point on a 10-point scale for us already signifies quite a significant erosion. And what we have seen in all of these countries is an executive overreach, dismantling control institutions, tampering with rule of law, working against judicial independence, but also introducing media restrictions. The top 4, that would be Hungary, Mexico, India, and the Philippines. They are borderline countries because they are already very close to being labeled autocratic by the BTI in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of separation of powers, or in terms of civil rights. Not all applies to all countries. These 3 factors contribute to a global erosion of democratic core institutions, or the other way around, the erosion of these core institutions, and especially association and assembly rights, led to the very autocratic hardening or the very democratic backsliding that we had witnessed. Now the question is, what triggered that kind of erosion? And already it was volunteered that that could be a decline in the performance of democratic institutions. If you're seeing the line here, the green line would be the performance of democratic institutions in the 44 countries that continuously for the last 20 years were governed democratically. Of course, we cannot talk about democratic institutions and autocracies. They are out, and I didn't want to skew the timeline. So I'm just talking about 44 countries continuously governed democratically. And yes, we see a decline in the performance of democratic institutions. We see an even stronger decline in the commitment that the political elites are bringing towards these democratic institutions. And we are seeing a pronounced decline in the approval of the population to democracy, but not to democracy. And many of our country reports explain that in detail, not to democracy as such, but to the workings of democratic institutions and processes. What is important for me when I'm looking at the 44 countries and I see the steepest declines, all the same country names keep popping up again. Hungary, Bulgaria, South Africa, India, Panama, Peru, Romania. Had downgrades, significant downgrades in all of these. And these are some of the severest backsliders. So it would not necessarily mean, because they only constitute about a quarter of the countries that we are looking at, it would not necessarily mean that in the other 3/4 of democracies there's a steep erosion in the performance of democratic institutions. I believe that this is important to also highlight that yes, there are very stable democracies whose institutions are working exceptionally well. The Baltic states or Taiwan or Uruguay. You have a number of countries that you could single out and say, this is working very well. Nonetheless, it doesn't make the failure of democratic institutions any better, but it does also not change the fact that this does not justify or allow for the autocratic narrative if you only untie my hands, if you only allow me to tamper with the separation of powers, if I could only repress independent courts, I would have the chance to rule more efficiently top-down. There is no efficiency bonus for top-down management in autocracies. Representative for autocratic governance is not Singapore, but rather Nicaragua or Uganda. And so just let me very briefly, because I'm running out of time, lead you through performance by regime types. Yes, you would be having Singapore, Qatar, the Emirates, and Bahrain having excellent administrative services. End of story, basically. The same applies to anti-corruption policy. See, there's nothing positive to say that more than half of democratic governments are not able to have an anti-corruption policy worth mentioning. But at the same time, look at the 77 autocracies that we are having, and you're only having 5 where you could say they have an anti-corruption policy that deserves their name. And again, let me call their names. It's again Singapore, and it is the Emirates, and it is again Qatar, and then we have Kuwait or Rwanda, and when you're starting to call an anti-corruption policy like the one of Rwanda at least good, then you know what kind of quality we are talking about here. So we can uphold that yes, democratic institutions sometimes underperform, and they have their failure, and sometimes they are extreme failures of clientelism and all, as we see here on the graph. But this is nothing as compared to the corrupt, wasteful institutions in almost all autocracies that are milking the state. But the narrative that a more autocratic government can be more efficient is a strong one. And we have seen and we know the pattern of executive power grabs. We've seen the two-pronged approach of, on the one hand, silence your critics, and on the other hand, minimize control. Those are the two angles. Silence your critics means limit participation rights, and limit the control means tamper with the rule of law. So on the one hand, you have muzzling the media, restricting civil society activities. This is where you start with. We know the media laws that Poland had, that Hungary has. But this is just the beginning of the story. You might end up with manipulating elections, as we have so often seen. Starting the point with rule of law would be undermining judicial independence, but the end point might well be that you're revising the constitution, as we've seen in Hungary. What are the counter strategies? Was the positive line that I promised. The counter strategies was, of course, to reverse exactly that what we have seen, go at the same points, make sure that journalistic integrity is upheld, that you're defending electoral integrity, that you mobilize civil society, that your democratic opposition is united, that you work against rule of law erosion, and that you challenge constitutional revisions. And this is not an academic wish list. In the BTI and in the detailed country reports that we've seen over the years, this is all from this BTI. Those are examples all from the BTI. The united democratic opposition that we've seen in Poland, the mass mobilization in Bangladesh against repression and corruption, which led to democratization, or at least the hope for democratization, the insistence in Senegal on electoral integrity and the set election date and the freeing of the opposition candidate, the very brave and courageous journalists in Guatemala, and I might also call up Turkey, even though press repression in Turkey is monstrous, but there are still reporters publishing. But media and journalists were essential in Guatemala to defend the electoral victory of Bernardo Arevalo. Sri Lankan Supreme Court that is defending democratic processes. Kenya's Gen Z protests, very impressive, that ended up in revoking the Finance Act and calling for democratic opening. And I think in Brazil's turnaround, successful turnaround, a lot of these positive points are kind of accumulated. And this turnaround is followed by democratic recovery. So the Brazilian government is pursuing a path where it is prosecuting executive overreach and where it is trying to have a systematic approach to fight misinformation in election campaigns. So this is all positive news that we are seeing, even though it does not automatically reflect in numbers. But this is why we believe that the country reports of the BTI are important to contextualize the data that you're getting. And now, at the very end of my presentation, let me just pour a little bit of water into the wine that I just offered you. These are democratic recoveries, and in these democratic recoveries you see that and those are only the few that I could really mention. There are not so many much more. You see that most of the time a country ends up with less democratic quality than it used to have before the autocratization process started. And the question, of course, is why is that? There are three answers that I would like to uphold. The one is there are autocratic holdovers. This is what Poland is seeing today. So there are people in powerful positions that are still opposing the democratization process, the re-democratization process, and there are autocratic regulations and rules and laws that are still in place, and it takes a lot of time to overcome them democratically. So there's a dilemma. Should I pursue the fast track and get rid of that anti-democratically, or not following by the democratic playbook at least, or should it take time where the defenders of the old system have time enough to organize? So that's the autocratic temptation that then comes into play. Yes, let's use those powers that we are still having from the old regime, the possibility to rule through. We are only doing it for the best reasons, we are only doing it for the democratic reasons, and then you start to get on a slippery slope where you're not upholding democratic principles anymore. And the last one is the autocracies support that is still alive and kicking. Geostrategically, there are several countries that are trying to undermine democratic recoveries. We have to know these problems to get to the point where we can say, yes, this is an additional challenge, but democratic turnarounds are possible by showing democratic resistance. I thank you all.
Many thanks, Hauke, for such a wealth of information that we have to digest and also to discuss. Downward curves up everywhere. I'm making time for them to prepare everything. I'm sure you've noticed already. Downward trends, but also positive elements. I've highlighted protests in Senegal and Kenya, journalists' resistance in Guatemala, for example, democratic recovery in Brazil, student protests in Bangladesh. So to discuss all these, we'd like to call to the stage Fernando Vallespin, Erika Rodriguez Pinzon, and Sabine Donner. Fernando is Emeritus Professor. If you can come to the stage, please. Yes. Fernando is Emeritus Professor of Political Science at the Autonomous University of Madrid. He was the former president of the Center of Sociological Research. Erika Rodriguez is the director of the Carolina Foundation, and Sabine Donner is the co-director of the Bertelsmann Transformation Index. Right, so now I need to go to this stage since we have to do a bit of everything. Well, many thanks for, let me just, I'll be much better so that I can look at you. Many thanks for this. Let me highlight the general question. We'll go more into the detail afterwards, but can we say that democracy is delivering what citizens need? What are the expectations that they have that are not being delivered? This is an open question to you all, then I'll start then afterwards on each of you. But do you think democracy can adapt to the new and social and political realities that we have today? I know it's a broad, very overarching question, but I'd like to start with this broad frame. Maybe Erika, you'd like to take the floor first. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to say thank you for this, the quality of the index. This is really remarkable. Well, I think the democracy, it's performing, it's trying to provide with good policies in many countries, but it's still facing the really big challenges, like, for example, the change in technology and the governance of technology. It's facing the climate change, it's facing the migration process, a strong migration process around the world. So we are having democracies that are running, I don't know how to say this, they are trying to provide, but at the same time they are playing and dealing with the weaknesses of the past, and the structural weaknesses, and at the same time answering a time that is changing very, very fast, and challenges that are coming very fast. So we have weak structures trying to deliver goods in a moment of change. And I need to say something about the international change also, the change of the international system, because this is putting even more pressure on democracies. And this is one of the things that is very difficult to face, because we doesn't have really many tools to deal with this uncertainty that is rolling our time.
Yeah. Fernando, Sabine, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah. Well, I had prepared a micro paper,
Wow.
for this, but I'll put it in my pocket.
Right, there's a timer there. So watch out.
No problem whatsoever. Yeah. Well, I think the main problem for democracies nowadays is the lack of trust on part of a lot of citizens in the political class, if we wanted to call it like that, and in some political institutions. So you just have to look at our democratic systems. Because we're here invited by the Bertelsmann Stiftung. Let's start with Germany. Friedrich Merz. In 1 year, he has achieved something that seemed almost impossible, is having the support, having the approval of just the same amount of people that Scholz had at the end of his term, so which is almost impossible. Look at Macron. More than 2/3 of French citizens don't show any support for him, right? Take the case of Starmer in the UK. He also made a record, I think, in terms of underperforming in front of the people somehow. And so in that sense, I think it's almost a structural problem that democracies have. We still don't know the reason for that, which is that somehow there has been a divorce between, on the one hand, governments, on the other hand, citizens. Why, if people are increasing the life quality, increasing the services, except for housing or certain social problems that, of course, have not been solved yet, but they're problems that have always existed, right? So this is somehow the great puzzle, so that we don't have a clear answer for that. We have lots of hypotheses. We have lots of reports trying to present different supposed reasons for this withdrawal of citizens' confidence, but in the end, we don't know why. We don't know why. In face of most of the citizens, there's a certain disregard towards politics, not just to the political class, but to politics. And so some people say, well, it has to do with performance. Well, I wouldn't be that sure. I think we have to go deeper and try to find out some of the reasons for that. By the way, I don't think there are any indexes, maybe you know, where they consider trust to be being, you know, one of the elements that somehow explains the quality of democracy. So maybe trust in institutions, yes, but not so much in the political class, in politicians themselves.
Right. Technology.
Well, I could go on, yeah, but a little bit here.
Yeah, thanks. Technology, migration, tools, uncertainty, trust, political class. Sabine, do you want to expand on things that have been already said on this, and what do citizens need or want, or what are the expectations that are unfulfilled?
But maybe just to expand a little bit, I think, you know, the dilemma is that we are rightly criticizing democracies for not delivering enough. And it is important that we do that nationally, internationally. But we sort of, and Hauke presented it, we sort of avoid looking at, no matter what political regime is at the moment, not delivering what people are expecting, I think.
Yeah.
Politics and governance is more difficult because of the issues you just raised and the pressures we were talking about. I think what autocracies are very good at is professing, and at least rhetorically, conveying certainty or the appearance of certainty in very uncertain times. Stable order, etc., efficient governing. We do see that empirically that's not true. Actually, in a time, and Angel referred to that, in the past 20 years, we also managed to actually fight poverty, not to the extent it is necessary. This is not continuing at the moment in a time where we see an autocratic reversal. So I think what we have to be clear about is autocratization is, even though we are saying that's a wave, it's not a natural phenomenon that is, you know, an accident. It is a political strategy, and for reasons. And sometimes I think the reaction, of course, a democratic system doesn't have the opportunity, shouldn't do that, to sort of block out all opposition and use the means of repression to not let the disenfranchisement with political elites show. Autocracies have, and they are using it a lot at the moment. So I think we just have to be clear on that.
It's a very good headline, what you just said. Autocracies convey certainty in an allegedly certainty in an uncertain time. And that's what they're very good at. That's a very good headline. If there are any people from the press, that would be a good one. Just talking about, you just mentioned, I think, that before, it was Hauke or Mr. Alonso, about the post-truth, the fake news. And Fernando, you've, in many of your articles on El País, you highlight this. The BTI highlights that the most pronounced setbacks concern freedom of press and also this type of misinformation. What do you think is the impact of this post-truth on these current trends, not only in the 137 countries analyzed, but also in general, because that doesn't happen far away from here. We have many examples here, and Spain is not one of the 137 examples. So what's the effect of this post-truth? I'm addressing this to Fernando, but it's open to all of you, because I've read many of his articles in El País referring to this. This you mentioned Orwell, this element. So,
well, I think there are two problems regarding the post-truth issues, so in general, or disinformation and all that stuff. So first is the impossibility to really define an objective reality, right? So I think that's quite important. So all kinds of reflections and opinions on what's going on, right, politically, are disregarded because everyone fears that they're being duped, that, you know, that's false information, it's fake news, or it is crafted in order to obtain a certain goal. But so this is one of the problems. So misinformation. So in the end, second problem is that post-truth is created mainly on one channel, which are social media. And social media and online press, which is all the news, are in the hands of, you know, small number of plutocrats, right? These technocrats or Silicon Valley elite, call it as you like, but and that's dangerous, because it's not just that they have the property of it. I mean, they have the technology. And so in order to be able to compete with what they try to foster, what they try to enhance, you know, fostering particularly confrontation among political groups and stuff like that. You know, the problem is that we couldn't really create an opposition to the medial power, right? And also, and this is also quite an important issue, is that the same people that have the know-how, technological know-how, and own those media are the people that own the cultural industry, Hollywood films, series, entertainment. So imagine the power that is being absorbed in the hands of this elite. And here in Europe we have a problem because we can't compete with them. So we have to necessarily negotiate with them. So I think this we have to consider the problem from those two perspectives. One, you know, the question of when and how do we know that what we read or what we watch is real, which we don't know anymore. And on the other hand, you know, the immense power that's in the hands of this elite that I've just talked about.
Would you like to expand on that?
Well, I totally agree with Fernando, and I was thinking about how does post-truth is also undermining the basics of society. Yes, for example, it's undermining the socialization process through the undermining of education, the undermining the belief in science and technological process, and at the same time, paradoxically, and it's undermining the trust between the community. And I think this point is important, because we are not only facing political polarization, we are also facing social polarization. And this social polarization is having it's making hard to create a new social cohesion or to lead democracy to enhance those mechanisms of social cohesion.
Yep.
Well, one of I agree with all of you, and I don't have the solution, but I see, and bringing some hope in it at least, is also when we're looking back 20 years ago, we were enthusiastic about new technology because we thought it would further and promote democracy.
Yeah.
So, and then we sort of lost a bit of track, actually, and were maybe, would I call it too naive or complacent? Because, you know, things were going well, like Angel just said. And we didn't focus enough maybe on the fact that there were forces, and you mentioned some, but also on political sides that were actually having a strategy or developing a strategy.
Of course, yeah.
And we were more or less trusting that democracy and technology would go in our favor. So, I mean, what does that mean for now? I think just like we have to develop narratives that give society back the hope that things will get better and there will be answers politically, I think we should reclaim, and there are signs that this is happening in our societies, also in the countries that we are looking at, to reclaim that space actually. And also there, if I look at the Gen Z protests, they wouldn't be possible without the technology and social media. So there can be a force for good. The same holds true for misinformation. I mean, it's going to be a disaster. I'm just saying, my notion is that we are more awake than we have been 10 years ago, where we sort of ignored the developments, and there are seeds, maybe only.
That's a good point. Now we know what happens.
Exactly.
Now we know we're being manipulated.
And that's maybe, and hopefully, a start to actually reclaim that space and fill it strategically. I think it's, again, this is also not an accident. There were powers, people, political actors or societal actors or enterprises who were using that for their ends. And we just have to reclaim that.
One tiny point.
Sure.
Because, as you said, we need to be hopeful, right? So, I was talking to an expert in Hungarian politics recently, and she said, the question is, who is this Peter Magyar, who achieved this absolute prowess, that he was really to kick out Viktor Orban. And then she said, look, Viktor, people knew about him, but he started existing politically because of an interview that someone made of him at the YouTube channel. And it turned viral. And everyone in Hungary, started watching it. And from that moment on, right, he became a name and he became a political force. So not everything is lost. I mean, no matter who owns YouTube, in the end, all of us can use YouTube, and we can also create things, through YouTube. As an example, right? So this ambivalence does indeed exist. So we just know how to work it for the better, not for the worse, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you all. Erika, now more focused on Latin America continent, Fundación Carolina works on issues related to democracy in Latin America. The BTI, the regional report on Latin America and the Caribbean, shows the two sides of the coin, as Hauke was explaining before, in general terms. On the one hand, we have countries such as Chile and Uruguay that stand for their consistent prosecution of corruption cases. And that's what the BTI regional report finds out. But on the other hand, we have countries such as El Salvador, where fundamental rights have been severely eroded. Can you just elaborate a bit more on the main problems and the main issues in Latin America in terms of the democracy index?
Yes, it is very interesting because, as you said, there are two faces of the coin, two faces here in Latin America. You can see countries with strong democracies like Chile, like Costa Rica, like Uruguay. There are always a model of democracy. And at the same time, we have countries like Nicaragua, Venezuela, and El Salvador. And I found very interesting the remark that you did about Mexico, because Mexico is a very interesting case. And there are many challenges for democracy in Latin America, but I think there are five that are really relevant for this different types of democracy that we are seeing there. The first one is the social discontent. The first challenge is social discontent. Chile is a very good example. In 2019, we saw that wave of social unrest, and we are still facing the consequences of that unrest. But especially, we're facing that it is still unsolved. There is still unsolved. They are still having problems, the poor quality of public policies. They are still having limits on social mobility, and that's a problem for the entire region. And the weakness of institutions, and they are in this the contrary of virtues is
Country Earth.
vicious, this vicious cycle, excuse me, I forget the word. This vicious cycle where the people is not receiving good policies and the democracy is not delivering, and at the same time the institutions are becoming weaker. This is common for the entire region, but there are some certain points, certain issues that are particular for some countries. For example, the case of Mexico, I find very interesting the militarism and the rise of militarism, the lack of independence and injustice. This is very interesting because this is a process that is happening in a country where the government is strong, where the formal democracy is still strong, but they are having huge problems or a huge translation of power to military hands. And that's and it's interesting. And the second point for that issue that is interesting, especially in Mexico, but also in it's very important to explain the El Salvador, is the role of criminal actors and the criminal governance. And we are seeing how in the region it's growing a network of different criminal actors that are using the state in different ways, in a different appropriation of the territories and the capabilities of the states. And I think we couldn't really understand the deep and the sophistication of this phenomenon, because it is playing an important role in local terms, but it is adapting to different contexts. And this adaptation is the most important capability of criminal gangs, because they have a really strong capability to adapt to different situations, to different types of state, and to different opportunities that they face. And this is happening in all the entire region. What happened in El Salvador, it's a very good example of how criminal governance were taking the control of the entire, not only the territory, the social system, because they rule the social system. They rule, they know how the people must behave within the society. But at the same time, we saw there in El Salvador one of the weakest criminal groups. And it is, and in El Salvador also we saw the third of the most important issues for me in Latin America, that is a successful narrative of authoritarianism that talks about order. And it's interesting, this use of order, the concept of order, as something that we lost, but we never have this kind of order. We are remembering a past time that never happened. But its success is very successful. It's very successful in a kind of idealization of the past, and using the fear as a fuel for the surpass of democracy rules. And they are using fear, and fear is common to the entire region in different types, but fear is common to all the citizens of the region. And this is one of the last remarks that I would do. We are facing a problem of expectations within the entire region. People are scared because they don't really know what will happen in the future, because the economy is weak, because the economy changed a lot, but also they are facing, and especially young people are facing many challenges that they are not able to deal with. And they are not being involved in the construction of solutions. They are not being involved in politics, and especially the profound, the deep inequality in the region is undermining the capability of young people to work together to construct new societies when they can provide with solutions to the important challenges that they are facing. Actually, the region is becoming more unequal. If you see Ontario in terms of youngs and in terms of the future of young people. And this is a problem for democracy because we are feeding the authoritarianism of the future.
Great, thank you. That links to that was perfect because that links to my next question on participation or political participation. The report, and I'm just addressing to you, Sabine, the report highlights that the decline is particularly visible in two areas. One is restrictions on political participation, and also the weakening of the rule of law safeguards. And also the BTI states that these patterns identified in the 137 countries extend beyond the countries analyzed. Is it somewhat related to what Erika was saying about, are we seeing the participation, involvement of young people, or not young people in general, in particular, but in general, involvement of engagement of citizens into the political or policy-making processes? Is that an issue that can be extrapolated not only in the countries analyzed, but also in other countries?
I mean, we meant that particularly that there's a pattern on how to autocratize, and I think it relates to the extent to not only in Latin America, but there's certain patterns and strategic actions to take. What I would like to refer to it is that, and we see some of the phenomena that you mentioned in Latin America, not only there, the militarization of societies or politics is sort of also a global phenomenon. I think, and I would like to go back to what to make of it. I'm not a Latin American expert, so I would like to ask you so many questions to go deeper into that. But one of the notions would be that, functioning, or, well, democracies, I think, have to not only come up with a narrative, but also, and we talked about turnovers or turnarounds and democratic recovery, that's important. I think renewal is important as well of a social contract that is not working anymore because of many reasons. Getting people to participate in a way that is meaningful and that has a consequence in even functioning democracy, we're struggling with that. There's not a lot of innovative ideas there that politicians can actually try how to do that. So, I mean, one of the chances that I see in the crisis, if I look at how could democracies prevail, is, of course, that crisis always gives you the opportunity to actually renew something and do it differently. And I think we don't see enough of that, but I think that might be a way forward. And I don't see enough, I think, political actors that are courageous enough to do that because, you cannot determine the outcome. But I think this would be something, and when we're talking about more involvement of civil society or citizens, that's always a risk because it's difficult and you have different opinions, but going more innovative ways in how democracies are trying to be responsive to people would be a very good idea, and hopefully we see more of that because of the crisis, when we can avoid that autocratic powers are taking over in our societies.
Right. Way forward, that's the word that you mentioned. There seems to be a glimmer of hope. The previous speakers also have talked about the glimmer of hope. There's hope behind these numbers. Poland, Hungary, Brazil, Bangladesh, Nepal, etc. Can we identify a common pattern of all these examples? What is like the main highlights that you would highlight in these countries that could be, for example, extrapolated to other realities, so that we can learn something from these good examples, we could say? Like very straight, because we're running out of time, like also to open the floor to the audience.
Whom are you asking now?
For example, you volunteer.
Yeah, well, I think it's very contextual. It depends very much on the context of every country. I think In the case of Poland and Hungary, it's quite clear. I mean, you can't be the outcast if you want to live in the European Union, right? Everyone's saying you're Hungarian, you know, you're out of the club somehow. And so in that sense, I mean, there was a demand. You know, how can you trust a leader that can be both friends of Putin and Trump? I mean, that's unexplainable, you know. Particularly if you look at what, you know, all the menaces, you know, all the threats that Trump is making to against the European Union and all that stuff. And so maybe in other cases, you know, the contexts are different, and I think the reasons are different. But I would also try to make myself, or to make us a question, you know, that might be controversial, which is that when we talk about democracy, as Fukuyama would say, we're talking about Denmark. That's where, you know, that's a 10. Well, Denmark or Sweden or whatever, small countries, incredibly wealthy, with lasting institutions, you know, some of the earliest democracies. Some institutions could, in the end, you know, are embedded in a civic culture. And then we examine the rest of the world, you know, with that prism, right? And in that sense, I mean, so we have to be careful, you know. So, and I think it's, depending on the context, maybe it's more admirable what we find in certain contexts where it's almost impossible, you know, to become a democracy than in others. And then on the other hand, we as democracies haven't solved yet what I consider to be a very big problem, which we can frame, you know, majority rule versus institutions of the rule of law, right? Because one of the misgivings of the populists have a lot to do with this kind of anti-majoritarian decisions on part of Supreme Courts or constitutional courts or specialized agencies like central banks or the European Central Bank and so on and so forth. So we have to be careful because the main point, the most positive point that people see in populism is that they preach, you know, the need for majority rule. That's what the majority wants. And you know, you just have to listen to Trump's speeches. Who are they? And he looks at the Supreme Court, you know, who try to decide against the will of the people, right? And so in this instability that we have, right, between, on the one hand, those checks on power, the stabilizers, which, from my point of view, are unavoidable and necessary, absolutely necessary. But on the other hand, what has to do with, you know, with the rule by the people and for the people, right? And so in that sense, I think we would have to solve that somehow. We as political scientists, but also somehow maybe through making reforms in our democratic institutions that can allow people to be more present in certain decisions that they are being now, I would say, right? So there's a lot of work to do, you know, regarding that kind of issues. Yeah.
Thanks. I'd like to open the floor to the audience so that you can maybe reply. We're really running out of time. The timer is in red already. So, and my colleagues are saying we need to finish. Any question? There's one here. If my colleagues can take the mic. Yeah, thank you. One question here, and any other? I'll take a couple. And yeah, 1, 2. Okay, 3. Enough. Okay, that's autocracy. So one will start here, then second one there, and the third here. If you could identify yourself, thank you. Be very short because we're really running out of time and we need to go straight to the point. Thank you. It's not working if my colleagues, yeah. The mic, please. Yeah, thank you. The mic.
No, it's working.
You have to turn it on. Yeah. Is it working? Yeah, it's green.
No, it's green, yeah.
It's green. Yeah.
Is it okay?
Green light, right.
Fine.
Thank you.
Simple and short.
Thanks.
We haven't heard a word on the United States. Please, could you tell us something about it?
That's one on the United States. That's, of course, it was going to be here, but okay. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. How would you like to reply?
I showed you the map in the beginning where I said that we had 23 OECD countries, including Spain or Germany or Japan or the United States, excluded, and that was a mistake, and that we are working on correcting that mistake. But if the United States, and I think that was your question, was in the BTI, let's just assume it was, we would see that it would fall from the very top of the list of established, consolidated, well-working democracies to a level where it might already be in the spectrum of defective democracies, because institutions are challenged, so this is a very real challenge. On the other hand, at the moment, these institutions are still holding. So it is kind of, it's still an open game, I would say. But you would see a decided downturn in the scoring. This is a pretty safe assumption, I would say. And I thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. Another question down there. Yeah, right there. Yeah, if you could identify yourself, please.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for the discussion. My name is Gustavo Perez. I'm a PhD student in political science. For the panel, I just wanted to hear your thoughts about the scholarship explanations about democratic decline, particularly focusing on executive aggrandizement, focusing on populism, polarization, and mainly in inequality. I would like to hear from anybody of you. Thank you.
Right.
I didn't understand.
Any of you, please, very short. They didn't understand from here. Could you repeat a bit slowlier? Yeah, thank you.
Slowly.
Yeah. Now, can you hear me? Okay. I would like to
Sorry,
hear...
are you talking to anybody in particular or in general?
in general.
In general,
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to hear your thoughts about what the scholarship has to say about democratic decline nowadays, particularly to democratic backsliding. So they are talking about populism, polarization, they are talking about executive aggrandizement in particular, and inequality. So if you can relate any of these topics to the explanations and the answers that you provide.
Right, maybe that would be addressed to the scholar here, if am I putting you in a difficult position, Mr. Vallespin, Fernando?
Well, I don't know, because I still haven't understood the question. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
Well, you wrote a book about populism. I think you are the expert.
Populism. He's asking me about populism.
Well,
what about populism? In particular, because populism is too broad, a subject. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How are those related to the topic that we're talking about today, democratic decline?
Right-wing, left-wing populism, how are they related to the debate that we are talking about? Right. Okay, that's a very broad question. That's, that's a PhD, I would say. That's a lot. Maybe over a glass of wine, that would be better. That's an idea. There's a really good glass of wine, afterwards.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can discuss that. Right. Thank you. Time is really, we're running out of time. Thank you. And then we have a third question here. We have the mic. You could identify yourself. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I'm Felip Roca. I'm Director of International Relations of the City of Barcelona. And I would like to hear your thoughts on the role that cities can and should play in protecting democratic values, because I think your analysis was not taking into account the different layers of governance, and I'm interested in that.
Local governments, so closer to the citizens. So that's opening Pandora's box, maybe, but would you like to,
Yes.
anybody else? Anybody would like to expand on that?
I'd like to talk about Mamdani. We can talk about, this phenomenon, that happened in New York. And I think it explains a lot about, this distance that people feel towards the political class. And when suddenly someone appears, that, meets them almost at the street and start talking about their everyday problems, then it becomes someone immediately attractive, right? The problem is if in the end all those problems that can be solved locally also apply to other levels of government, of course, particularly at the national level, right? So because I think it is rather easy to govern the best country, let's say, because it's wealthy, it doesn't have any monetary problems. I mean, they can achieve their ends. But, Spain is different, right? So, and you can't compare that. And it's relatively easy if you can, well, relatively easy, in a mid-sized town, to solve the problems that people feel are more urgent or need an urgent solution than at a broader context, right? So in that sense, I think we can experiment and we can make democratic experiments at the local level. And if they work, then we should translate them, and at the other levels as well. That would be my position.
Yes, I barely mentioned a word that it is important for me in this topic, and it's community. And I think we are seeing the construction of narratives that are talking about different types of communities. Nativism, the communities around the national priority that we are hearing here in Spain, and the reconstruction of the idea of community and how to deal with the community through local governments is very important for me. The reconstruction is not only about social cohesion, it's about the capabilities of local authorities to deal with communitary affairs with the community and to integrate the community. Fernando already mentioned the importance of social society in terms of take care of democracy, and it's important because it is in the local level where we can play harder, trying to preserve those values that you mentioned.
Right.
Just one thought to add, maybe.
Very
I think the local part of democracy is playing the most crucial sort of role in many of the aspects we mentioned, rebuilding trust, for example. This is where people see what politics is delivering and how that impacts their lives. So I would say in cities, yes, you have more of a laboratory of innovative approaches that I would like to see more. This is the place where they often start, and we know that from many international fora of cities, and your city is part of many of them, because there we can experiment. On the other hand, many of the successful sort of re-democratization efforts we see at the moment, that holds true for Hungary and Peter Magyar, but also in other countries, in Serbia, where there's at least resistance to autocratization. People go out to the local communities, those political actors, reform-oriented, go out to talk to people in local communities, connect with stakeholders in local communities, and that is what is sort of part of what is responsible that they get support, they get trust, because they're listening to people in their local, reality of life. So I think we cannot underestimate how important local democracy is.
Yeah, because housing, transportation, jobs, all these takes place at local level. So the local is really, really important because that's what matters to the citizens. Just to summarize very, very shortly, two words I've highlighted that have been mentioned here. One is hope, and another one is work. Hope, there's room for hope. Across many countries, civil society refuses to remain silent and in the face of repression, corruption, and the abuse of power. Citizens continue to mobilize through protests, independent journalism, grassroots organizations, and institutional resistance, showing that the demand for accountability and democratic participation remains alive. That's one side, hope. And work. A lot of work needs to be done. Political elites and governments, not just state government, but also regional and local governments, like the representative from the City Council of Barcelona has just explained or highlighted, must rebuild democratic legitimacy through transparency, accountability, stronger public institutions, and a renewed commitment to the rule of law and participation at local level. Civil society cannot safeguard democracy without responsive institutions, just as institutions cannot survive without active and organized citizen. Again, my admiration to the Bertelsmann Transformation Index team, a project that has been running over the past 20 years. Hauke, Sabine, Sebastian, who's not here, you've been diligently collecting data for the rest of you from different positions take informed decisions. And also thanks to Fernando and Erika from Fundación Carolina and your team. And now let's discuss the discussion over a glass of wine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot a group picture because the photographer always complains and yells at me that I always forget. Thank you.